John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Before we get into the episode, just want to let you know that this is the free version of the podcast, and all that means is that we are way behind where I'm at in Patreon. So if you are loving this podcast and you need more John Constantine in your life, definitely go check us out at patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books and sign up for the Hellblazer tier, where you'll get access to the entire Hellblazer library that I've recorded so far. And also you'll get access to the exclusive episodes of the Planes, Trains, and Comic Books main podcast. So if any of that sounds good to you, definitely go over to patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, and sign up there. And with that out of the way, let's get into the issue. Today we are reading Hellblazer number 40. And like I mentioned last time, this is the last issue of the Jamie Delano run. And while Jamie didn't create the character of John Constantine, I feel like this was a really solid run that kind of defined all these different aspects of John and gave a good foundation for the character of John for the future writers that followed him. So let me know what y'all thought about this run. Did you have any favorite issues? Was there a favorite storyline? My favorites are personally the first 12-issue story arc and the Family Man story arc. So before we get into this issue, just a little recap on what's been going on. For the last 3 or 4 issues, John Constantine has not been doing well. Mentally, he seems a bit unstable, and in the last issue, we learned that the reason why John's life seems to be cursed in some way is because he had a twin in the womb who was destined to be the actual Magus, which is like a super powerful magician, and he was like this perfect golden boy. And in the womb, John was so jealous of this golden boy that he purposefully closed off the umbilical cord, which killed his brother and left him to be born even though he was sickly and malnourished. And this act of murder in the womb has caused John all his bad luck and misfortune throughout his entire life. And in the last issue, we learned all that when John was on like a mushroom trip and he had gone inside of a cave and went swimming naked, and then he swam towards the lights. And the last anyone saw of him was Errol, who tracked John's footprints in the morning, which led him into the pool inside of the cave, but John was nowhere to be found. He could not find him. And before we dive into this issue, I will just say the little disclaimer, I did not fully understand everything that happened in this issue, so if I miss something or I get something wrong, I apologize, but I'm doing my best. It's very esoteric, and a lot of this is kind of open to interpretation. So with that out of the way, let's get into this issue. So first things first, on the cover here, we see 4 faces of the same person. Each are lit completely different, and all of them are in different orientations from one another. And we see that this issue was written by Jamie Delano with art by Dave McKean, who, if you remember, was the artist on the Neil Gaiman issue called Hold Me, which I believe is issue 27. And his art definitely fits with this story as far as being esoteric and weird, giving you even more stuff to think about and interpret. So, we start off on the first page, and we are at the asylum called Ravenscar. And if you know your John Constantine lore, this is the asylum that John stayed at after he failed to save Astra's soul. That is from the story arc called Newcastle. I think it's issues 11 and 12. And we're getting narration of someone. We're assuming it's John because it seems like this someone is doing magic. And it seems like the person is trying to call someone forth, some kind of pretender, they're saying, that has been haunting them, and that way they can isolate it and remove it from their home of Ravenscar. Then we get a couple panels where we zoom into the area of Ravenscar where there is a lighthouse, and we do in fact see that this is John Constantine, but it's an older John Constantine. And he is doing a spell inside of the lighthouse, and like I said, he's calling something forth so that he can get rid of it. And the last bit of narration says, "All this is mine through right of birth. You have no claim. I cut you from me then, and I will do the same again." And then the lighthouse begins to light up very, very bright, and it begins to storm, and we get thunder and lightning. And in these panels, we're getting a voiceover of John being born in the hospital. Specifically what the doctors and nurses are saying as John and his brother are being born. They're saying, "Damn it, she's bleeding. We're losing her. We'll have to cut. Scalpels and retractors, nurse, quickly. The placenta's ruptured. God, she's a bloody mess inside. Careful, it's tangled in the cord. Jesus, look at it, kick. It's a fighter, all right. Shame about the other one, though. Sometimes it has to be all or nothing. What do you think, nurse? I think God moves in mysterious ways to do this to the mother who made such a perfect child. He's so beautiful, he frightens me. And we see on this page that the name of this issue is called The Magus. So it would seem that we are in some kind of alternate dimension where the Magus John Constantine, the Golden Boy version, was the one that lived, and the sickly version, which is the one we've been following, died. So the old man Constantine here is the Golden Boy version who is calling forth the sickly boy, which is the ghost or apparition that's been haunting him of his baby brother that he killed in the womb. So we cut to the inside of the lighthouse and we see old man John Constantine, and he's definitely old. He's missing an arm. He's got like this big robe on, and we see on the floor there is a circle that he has made, and there's a body in that circle, and he's speaking to someone in the shadows, saying, "So, enemy of mine, have I bound you with my art? Is my working good? Foul and diseased revenant, show yourself. I have not sacrificed the life of my old and loyal friend merely to toy with you." And in the shadows, we see a ghostly apparition appear, and the old man continues, "Come closer, worthless rotten shade. Do you think that I'm afraid to view your scabrous face? This is my place. I am the power here. You have no influence. I am still the shining one, while you remain no more than the banished sickly boy, grown old in grotesque parody of my righteous life. Your presence here insults me and demands my wrath to demonstrate that you may not haunt me. You may not corrupt my land nor threaten those that I have called mine. I am the Magus Constantine, and my rage insists that you conform to my desire. Understand this, you are dead, brother." And then he yells out dead again, and lightning strikes the lighthouse. Then we cut to another building in Ravenscar, where an old woman is reading tarot cards. And this old woman is actually Zed. And she looks a lot different than she did in the last issue. She literally just looks like an old grandma who's got like her hair up in a bun and she's all wrinkled. And the card that she's looking at is called The Towers. And if you remember from the last issue, that was the middle card that the younger John Constantine in the last issue had pulled. And then Zed goes over to the window and looks out at the lighthouse and sees that it's been blown up by lightning. And she says, "John, what have you done?" And then she goes over to a balcony and yells down, "Somebody tell me what's happening." And there's a bunch of people down here who are saying that this is a disaster. There were no storms prophesied, that they need to bring lights and blankets. And there's one old man here that kind of stands out the way that they draw him. He's sitting on some red cushions on a double-sized electric wheelchair. So it's basically a love seat couch that is electric and has wheels. And this man says, "Zed, it's terrible. The Magus Tower's been hit by lightning." And Zed looks down at him and says, "Wait down there, Benjamin. It's too dark for me to find the way. I'll ride with you on your contraption." And just in case you didn't get it, Benjamin here is supposed to be John's friend Benjamin, who I believe actually died, I want to say in Swamp Thing, but I can't remember if it was Swamp Thing or the actual pages of Hellblazer. But either way, he is an old man in this, so he's alive in this reality. So Benjamin and Zed take his wheel couch to the lighthouse. And as they arrive, they see a body hanging from the wreckage, and Benjamin says, "It looks bad." And Zed in her old age has really bad eyesight, which is why she needed someone to take her to the lighthouse. And she sees the body, which is kind of hanging in a pose that is very similar to the Hangman Tarot card that we saw in the last issue. And she says, "Curse these feeble eyes. Who is the Hanged Man?" And one of the other people that has gone up there says, "It's old Gary Lester, mother." And she says, "Of course, it was bound to be." And as the people are getting Gary Lester's body out of the weird contorted pose it's hanging in, Benjamin says, "Looks as if he's alive at least." So luckily, the Magus version of John was wrong and didn't actually kill his best friend in order to bring forth the sickly boy apparition. And if you don't remember who Gary Lester is, he's actually in the very first issue or the very first story arc of Hellblazer. In issue 1, I believe it's called Hunger. He is the drug addict friend that was injecting bugs into his veins. So old lady Zed stands up and starts looking around in the wreckage, and she asks, "Does anyone see the Magus?" And Errol yells out that he has found him, and as Zed approaches, he says, "Come close and look. Tell me it isn't true." And she looks and sees John's body and says, "I knew it, but I hoped that I was wrong. Friends, we have suffered a most grievous tragedy. John Constantine is dead. And all the people around her, upon hearing this, start freaking out and yelling. And they're like, dead, the Magus is dead. This is a nightmare. What do we do without him? And Zed says, we will grieve. We will mourn our loss. Bring his empty body down to the hearth hall. Call Marge and Mercury to meet me there. Where are my sisters anyway? And then Errol answers her, didn't you hear? They're with my granddaughter, Mary, the child of Mercury's son who has my name. They say it's twins. They say she might not live. And then Zed asks, who is the father? And Errol answers, there is no father anymore, as he covers up the body of John Constantine. So with all this name dropping and everything, we find out that this version of John Constantine has all his friends with him. None of them died horrible deaths like they did in our reality. And they live in some kind of pagan community where John was the leader of this coven, and Errol and Mercury were a couple, and they had a kid, and that kid, who I believe is named Mary, is having twins, and the father of those twins is John. And all these details about John's friends and family are kind of there just to illustrate how different this alternate reality of John's is compared to the normal one that we've been reading so far. So Zed has John Constantine's body brought into the main building of the Ravenscar compound, and we see an older version of Marge and Mercury come pay their respects to John's body. And they're talking to Zed about how this is kind of an inconspicuous night for childbirth because John died and now birth is happening, so it's kind of a cyclical thing. And once they're done paying their respects, Zed suggests to John's friend Gary that he play a song in memory of John Constantine's life. So she hands him what looks like a lute or some kind of old school looking guitar, and he proceeds to sing a song that takes us through all of the moments that we've seen in the regular John Constantine's life where everything went wrong. But in this alternate reality, all of those things ended up okay. So, for example, the little girl named Astra, who was in Newcastle, who got her soul taken by Nergal the demon. In this reality, John actually saves her soul, but he lost his arm instead of her losing her arm and her soul. And he basically goes through all the other key moments of the series where John's friends died in our reality, but in this reality, John was able to save them and defeat the demons. And he was even able to save all of them from the rising waters of climate change. If you remember that issue where John was old and he saw his future where he died by getting eaten by sharks. In this reality, he actually got a boat and saved all of them and then brought them all to Ravenscar where he started this commune. So right as Gary finishes his song, they hear a voice coming from the room where John Constantine's body is, and it says, "Come off it, Gary. It's all a load of bollocks." And when everybody goes to check the room, they see that John Constantine, the Magus, has risen from the dead, and he's confused initially when he wakes up. He's actually got his mind confused with the memories of our John Constantine, where he thinks that all of his friends have been killed. And his friends say, "John, Magus, we thought you were dead." And John responds, "No, not dead. I was the last one left alive, flung out of my body into a horrible, lonely place. I thought I heard singing, but that's not possible. I killed Gary, didn't I? Or was that him?" And Zed's confused and she asks, "Who?" And John answers, "The other one, the sickly boy, of course. I don't think I understand, but they're alive. The singing wasn't a dream. Ah, a small mercy, but a mercy nonetheless. Poor loyal Gary, the oldest sorcerer's apprentice in town. I've betrayed him as I've betrayed all those who've loved me." But Zed tells him he wouldn't see it that way, nor would any of the others grieving out there. You see how they'll rejoice when they hear that their Magus is alive. And she goes to tell the others that John is alive and well. But before she can leave the room, John grabs her arm and says, "No, say nothing. It would be a lie. The Magus is dead. The Magus never lived. Just a hollow fraud, hanged in a web of illusion." And then Mercury comes into the room and interrupts John and Zed's conversation and tells Zed that the child is about to be born and they need her help. And before Zed leaves, she says, "Tell me something, John. This girl who's giving birth is named Mary, the same as your mother. They say that you're the father." And John answers, "Am I not the Magus, the father of everyone?" And Zed looks at him and says, "Stop being elusive, you know what I mean. Are these twins significant?" And Zed answers her, "Everything's significant, Zed. This is Ravenscar, a magic place at the heart of a magic life. All this is the creation of my will alone, my vision, my corrupted fantasy." And John stands up to look outside the window, and Zed goes over to him and says, "I've never seen you so vulnerable, so afraid. What happened in the lighthouse, John? Explain to me." And John turns to her and says, "Explain. Confess, more like. confess the crime of arrogance. And then he sits her down and says, "For months now, things have not been well here in our sanctuary, my heartland. You must have felt it, a tiredness, a sense of growing old." And then he explains what he was doing in the lighthouse earlier. He says, "Aloof in my high tower, I stalked the psychic landscape, searching to expose the chink in our defenses, exploited by this foe. And I began to doubt, was there a traitor in our midst? There was, but when I finally found him, that enemy was me, a self that I'd long ago since banished to a cold oblivion. My weakness, my need, my humanity. I wrought a stupid magic and brought my house of cards crashing down around the ears of me and all of mine. When I was a child, my father told me how, at my birth, my twin brother and mother died. He told me of his sadness, but said fate ruled the game. He smiled and called me Golden Boy, and said that he was glad that I was the one who lived, because the boy that died was a poor crippled thing. I felt no guilt and couldn't mourn for those I'd never known. Why should I, when it was clear that the gift of my survival was just my right and due? I was a special child. Everyone told me so. They offered their love willingly, and I would not refuse. I'd smile at them and make them laugh, but never let them in. Of course, I liked them well enough, but even then I knew that this world was just my playground, my path to better things. Just once and only once I felt a moment's doubt." And the moment of doubt that he's talking about is his version of the cemetery scene that John already talked about where he saw a golden boy. This is the reversal of that. So John and his dad are at the cemetery visiting the mother's grave, and the golden boy version of John sees an apparition of the sickly boy John Constantine. And instead of chasing after him like the John of our timeline did, the golden boy John totally ignores the sickly boy and turns and walks away from him. And John continues, "But he was my twin, Zed, a divorced reflection of myself. We were two halves of the same whole. I had no right to damn his soul, to curse his life to protect mine. Because of this, the hard, bright triumphs of my life can be no more than tarnished failures. Vainglorious Ravenscar is built up out of lies and founded on a crime." So John finally gets to the point and says that he arrogantly tried to heal this by force, and he used his friend Gary as a surrogate to magically reenact his murderous birth to try to capture and destroy the sickly boy again. And in confessing this to Zed, he definitely feels great shame and embarrassment. And he asks Zed what he should do. And she says, "Whatever you want to do, John, the same as ever." And John turns to her and says, "It's my responsibility to make it pure and whole again. I want to make amends." So then John walks over to the candles that were lit in the room and he blows them out. And Zed says that she can't see anything because her eyesight is so bad. And John says to her, "Sometimes gazing too much in the light just dazzles and obscures the truth. Sometimes the darkness is more honest. I'm leaving now, Zed, perhaps to return, more likely not. Stay here and sleep now, and when you wake, perhaps my crazed nightmare will be past and your dreams begun to grow." And then he just completely disappears from the room. And Zed reaches out to where he was standing, and he's not in the room anymore, so she says, "John, goodbye, my love." And then we cut to another dimension, and we see the Magus arrive on this plane, and this place seems like some sort of hell dimension. And this place looks all fiery, and there's like tombstones all around, and there's hellhounds walking everywhere. And as the Magus walks around, he says, "Only now do I appreciate the depths which I've lacked. You were a vast dimension of which I was ignorant, the scapegoat saddled with my sin. Now I must be the sacrificial lamb, shriven of my golden fleece and left alone to face my terror, shivering and old." And as he walks towards a bright light, he says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil." And then another man appears and says, "For I am the evilest bastard in this valley. 'Bout time you got here. I've been waiting 40 years. And the man who has appeared before him and said this is our version of John Constantine, but old. So now we've got two Johns. We've got the Magus and we've got the sickly boy John. And to hopefully not confuse things, from here on out, I'm going to call this alternate reality of John the Magus, and I'm going to call the one that just appeared John. So the Magus looks at John and says, "You." And John says, "Of course it's me. Who else would be here? Do us a favor, bro. Stop mongering and moaning on. You call yourself a Magus? Struth, I've shit better. I'm surprised Zed let you get away with all that bollocks. The one I knew had a bit more spark, but then she never had a lifetime of your self-righteousness to wear her down. So, pal, now that you've had a gander at how the other half lived and died, what do you think?" And the Magus looks around at this desolated world and says, If it's revenge you want, then take it. It's your right to bring down my brash display and humble my stupidity. But John doesn't take him up on his offer, and they both just start walking through this dimension as they talk to each other. And John points out while they're walking that this is actually a dimension where all the time strands of all the different John Constantines that have ever lived come together, and he says, we've got at least 2 emperors to our name. One was a black African and the other was a Christian stooge. And then there's a psychic assassin born sometime on the moon. There was a priest in the Clapham, and another a woman called Joanna, a nasty piece of work. And this is kind of cool because he's talking about Joanna Constantine, who's actually a character that's in Sandman. And it's funny because John is walking by all these different versions of himself and he's like flipping them off, which is just pure John Constantine. So eventually John and the Magus walk down to a beach, and on the beach there's a giant statue, much like the one with the cave that John went into the last issue. And he says, this is the center of the spiral, the place where time after time we've done the deed. Now we've both been back round the track again and fetched up at the start. This is where we fight the battles, each in his turn, abandoning the loser to fester and poisonously mock the futility of the victor's life from the decay of our dead mother's womb. And as they walk into the cave beneath the statue, the Magus says, this is too horrible. And John responds, yeah, of course it is. The question is, though, are we going to sort it out this time or just sit sobbing in the mess? And the Magus replies, is there a chance? We're both magicians in our ways, though neither of us a Magus. Can't we unite our opposites so that our elemental division is alchemically reconciled? Will you embrace me, brother? Will you forgive my crime? And John lights a cigarette and says, sure, why not? Consider it done. We're quits. But I'm not sure that's the point. It isn't you who's right or me the one who's injured. We're 2 halves of the problem, symptoms of the same disease. And as they walk deeper into the cave, they approach a pool that looks like it's blood. And they both stare into it, and the Magus says, is it too late or shall we try? What do you say, twin? There's always hope. And John looks at him with like an evil smile and says, but there's just as much despair. Still, like they say in magic circles, everything goes around. So come on then, you golden bastard. Let's have a laugh and give it one last whirl, and fall spinning through the thick red night towards that light, still shining in primal constancy in the gap between life and death. So they both undress and they get into the pool, and this one's kind of left up to interpretation of the art, but what I think is going on is the Magus and John are reconciling the killing of the other in their alternate dimensions, and they're merging together as one. We see both bodies swirling around in one big soup, and there's like a yin and yang symbol that happen, and then they come together into one bright light. And then we get a voiceover of someone yelling out Zed's name. And it seems like what we just saw was a dream that Zed was having in John's reality, and she's being called awake by Errol. And he's calling her because he's worried about John, because the last time he saw John, he had taken a bunch of mushrooms and then he disappeared inside of a cave. So Errol gets Mercury, Zed, and Marge, and they all go to the beach to try to see where John was last. And they're getting all the details from Errol from the last night where he gave him mushrooms, and then John went inside the cave and he followed him, but then John was gone. So Errol leads them back to the entrance of this cave, but when they get there, the entrance has been completely collapsed and there's no way in. But they do find footprints leading out from the rubble, and it's leading to a rock that has John's code on it, and written on the rock, it kind of looks like a tombstone, and it says, in memory of John Constantine, from womb to tomb and back again, the journey wobbles on. And everybody's very confused by this, specifically Errol. He's very distraught that he somehow thinks he lost John, and he says, all this magic stuff makes me feel sick and stupid. And Zed goes over to him and says, hey, don't take it personally, lover. Nobody understands everything. We just get momentary glimpses of something massive going on. It's not a stable universe, Errol. You need more than one life's experience before you can begin to see the subtle complexities in the patterns of growth and decay. But this doesn't seem to placate Errol. He seems very distraught, and Mercury comes over to comfort him. And then Zed, who's still standing in front of the tombstone, looks down and sees a tarot card. And when she picks it up, she sees that it's the Magus card. And she says to herself, and probably you'd live and die 1,000 times to get to be a Magus. And that is the end of the issue. So it seems like John Constantine has disappeared, but also that him and the Golden Boy have merged and officially become the Magus. And although that didn't undo all the bad stuff that happened to John throughout the series, it seems that going forward he will be a much more complete person who won't have all his friends dying around him all the time. But we shall see if that plays out in the rest of the series. So with that, if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comic books, all one word, at gmail.com. And we will see you on the next one.